All right, get ready to dive into some seriously fascinating ancient Hebrew poetry.
Oh, yeah.
We're cracking open the book of Isaiah today.
Awesome.
You sent us chapters 28 through 30.
Lots to unpack there.
And trust me,
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot to unpack.
For sure.
We got drunken priests, secret covenants,
Yeah.
a mysterious city named Ariel.
Oh, right.
That is not the mermaid.
Not the mermaid.
Very curious.
Very curious.
Let's dive in.
Those elements definitely jump out.
Yeah.
And they highlight a central theme in these chapters. The consequences of straying from faith.
Okay.
Both Ephraim,
Uh-huh.
that's the northern kingdom of Israel,
Right.
and Judah in the south.
Yeah.
They're both in God's crosshairs for their rebellion.
It's almost like a cosmic drama. Right. You can practically hear the thunder booming as Isaiah delivers these fiery warnings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he doesn't hold back with the imagery either.
Okay.
Take Ephraim, for example.
Right.
Their leaders are compared to a proud crown of the habitually drunk. Wow.
A fading flower about to be trampled underfoot.
Okay, that's not a pretty picture.
Nope.
But what's the deeper meaning there?
Well, it goes beyond just a bunch of guys having one too many glasses of wine.
Okay.
It's about spiritual complacency,
Mm-hmm.
about letting their faith wither while they indulge in worldly pleasures
Right.
and the consequences.
Uh-oh.
While they're facing invasion, destruction, the whole 9 yards,
Wow.
their spiritual state is directly linked to their impending physical downfall.
So it's like their inner turmoil is reflected in the chaos that's about to engulf them.
Precisely.
Wow.
You see, this was a time when the mighty Assyrian Empire was on the rise,
Mm-hmm.
and both Israel and Judah were feeling the pressure,
Yeah.
the response.
Uh-huh.
Instead of turning to God, they started making deals with other nations.
Oh, no.
A move Isaiah saw as a huge mistake,
Okay.
sign of misplaced faith.
Which brings us to that contrast between false security and true refuge that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
While Ephraim is drowning in their own decadence,
Yeah.
Judah is busy trying to secure themselves through political maneuvering.
Uh-huh.
They're making treaties with other nations, specifically Egypt,
Right.
thinking this will keep them safe.
Yeah.
But Isaiah warns them that it's a fool's errand.
Oh, dear.
He uses that powerful metaphor of a breach about to fall to illustrate their vulnerability.
I see.
Like they're standing on a crumbling foundation, completely oblivious to the danger.
And then there's that shattering potter's jar, right?
Yes,
Symbolizing the fragility of their carefully crafted alliances.
exactly.
Yeah.
Isaiah is essentially saying, you can't put your faith in human constructs.
Right.
True security comes only from God.
Mm-hmm.
He's highlighting the futility of seeking safety and stability in anything other than a right relationship with God.
Okay, so we got these two kingdoms, both in trouble, both making bad choices. But then we encounter this mysterious city called Ariel.
This is where things get really interesting. Now, when you hear Ariel, you might picture the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, of course.
But in this context, it's actually a poetic name for Jerusalem.
Okay.
And the imagery used to describe Ariel is pretty intense.
Oh.
Siege, mourning, voices whispering from the dust.
Wow.
It paints a bleak picture of a city in distress.
Wow. So even Jerusalem, the city of God, isn't immune to suffering and turmoil.
That's right.
Wow.
But even in the midst of this bleak description, there's a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Isaiah points to an eventual restoration and rejoicing for Ariel Jerusalem.
So there's hope for them yet.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a reminder that even in times of deepest despair, God's faithfulness remains.
Uh-huh.
He hasn't abandoned his people, even when they've strayed from him.
It's almost like he's saying, look, I'm going to let you experience the consequences of your choices.
Right.
But ultimately, I'm still here for you.
Yes.
I haven't given up on you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another powerful image in these chapters.
Okay.
The sealed book. Now, this isn't about a book that's physically sealed shut.
Right.
It's about a spiritual blindness that's preventing the people,
Uh-huh.
especially their leaders,
Right.
from comprehending God's message.
So it's like their minds are closed off to the truth.
Right.
Even though it's right in front of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is that this blindness isn't accidental.
Oh.
They've chosen to ignore God's warnings and cling to their own understanding.
Right.
They're relying on empty rituals and human wisdom instead of seeking true understanding from God.
Now, this part really grabbed me.
Yeah.
Because it made me think, why would they choose to be blind?
Right.
It seems counterintuitive.
It often boils down to pride and self-preservation.
Oh,
It's
Sure.
easier to ignore a message that challenges your worldview or demands repentance,
Right.
especially when you're in a position of power.
Yeah.
Admitting they need God's help might mean losing face,
Uh-huh.
appearing weak in the eyes of their rivals.
So they're so caught up in their own agendas and anxieties that they miss the bigger picture,
Exactly.
the truth that could actually set them free.
Right.
And the consequences of that blindness, as Isaiah describes them,
Yeah.
are pretty dire.
They are.
Their refusal to see the truth leads to further destruction, ultimately to exile.
Yes.
It's a sobering reminder that ignoring God's message never ends well,
It doesn't.
no matter how clever we think we are.
Absolutely.
But even amidst these warnings, Isaiah offers another striking analogy,
He does.
one that challenges our tendency to question God's authority. The potter and the clay. The potter and the clay.
The potter and the clay.
That's a classic image of God's sovereignty.
It is.
What's the key takeaway there?
It's a powerful challenge to the arrogance of those who question God's authority and wisdom.
Okay.
Isaiah is essentially saying, who are you to question the potter's intentions for the clay?
Right.
He knows what's best.
So it's a reminder of our place in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly.
We're not the ones in control.
Nope.
And we should be careful about questioning the one who...
Is precisely.
Humility and trust are key themes that run throughout these chapters.
They are.
Speaking of unexpected analogies,
Oh, yeah.
there's one that pops up that I find particularly intriguing. The farming metaphors.
Oh, yeah.
This is where Isaiah gets surprisingly specific about agricultural practices.
Yes, he does.
We've got plowing, sowing, threshing.
Huh?
It's like a sudden detour into ancient Israelite farming 101.
But of course, there's a deeper meaning here.
Okay.
Isaiah uses these everyday activities to illustrate God's careful and purposeful work in our lives.
So it's not just about planting seeds and harvesting crops. It's about understanding how God works in our lives,
That's it.
how he cultivates growth and brings about transformation.
Exactly.
He points out that a farmer doesn't plow continuously or thresh grain endlessly.
Right.
There's a rhythm to the work,
Right.
a time for each stage of the process.
Yes.
And this, he says, reflects God's own wisdom and timing. We may not always understand what he's doing or why,
Right.
but we can trust that he's working for our good,
Uh-huh.
just as the farmer works for a bountiful harvest. So even when things seem chaotic or uncertain, even when we feel like we're stuck in a spiritual rut,
Yes.
God is still in control,
He is.
working behind the scenes for our ultimate good.
Right.
This has been so insightful already, but I think it's time to take a quick pause to let all this sink in.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our exploration of Isaiah chapters 28 through 30.
Looking forward to it. Welcome back.
We were discussing the consequences of spiritual blindness
Right.
and that tendency we all have to rely on our own understanding instead of seeking guidance from God.
Yeah, it really sets the stage for one of the most powerful passages in these chapters.
Oh,
Isaiah 30,
okay.
verse 15 through 17.
All right, I'd love to hear your take on those.
This passage is so striking because it lays out a clear choice between trusting in God or trusting in your own strength. And you can see how Judah makes the wrong choice.
Yeah, how so?
They are determined to rely on their military might and those alliances they've made with powerful nations.
Oh, so they're really putting their faith in those things.
Yeah, it's almost like they think they can outrun their problems.
Right.
Literally by fleeing on horses.
Interesting. But Isaiah warns them that this will only lead to further defeat.
It's a classic example of human pride and short-sightedness.
Oh, wow.
We think we know better than God, that we can control our own destiny.
Yeah, we like to think we're in control.
But Isaiah shows us that this kind of thinking ultimately leads to downfall.
Right.
Their attempts at self-reliance backfire spectacularly.
The imagery that Isaiah uses here is so vivid.
Oh, yeah.
The idea of 1,000 fleeing at the threat of one, of being left isolated and exposed like a lone signal post.
Right.
It really drives home the point that self-reliance won't save you in the face of true danger.
It's truly powerful imagery. What makes these verses even more poignant is that contrast with the preceding verse,
Okay.
where God expresses this deep longing to be gracious and compassionate.
So he doesn't want to punish them.
He's not eager to punish them.
He wants them to come back to you.
He wants them to turn back to him, to
Yeah.
find refuge in his love and forgiveness.
There's that beautiful promise in verse 19.
Yes.
For you people in Zion, inhabited in Jerusalem, you will weep no longer. He will certainly be gracious to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears it, he will answer you.
Yes, it's a beautiful reminder that no matter how far we stray, God's grace is always available.
Always there.
He's waiting for us to turn back to him, to acknowledge our need for him.
And when we do, he promises not only forgiveness, but also guidance and restoration.
It's amazing.
He becomes our teacher,
Right.
leading us on the right path, even when we feel lost and confused.
Yes.
It makes me think of those farming metaphors we discussed earlier.
Oh, right.
God is like the patient farmer,
Uh-huh.
carefully tending to our lives,
Mm-hmm.
guiding our growth, even when we don't understand his methods.
Absolutely. There's a sense of hope and restoration woven throughout these chapters,
Yeah.
even amidst those warnings of judgment.
Yeah. So there's always that hope.
Yes, it's a reminder that God's love is always present,
Mm-hmm.
even when we're experiencing the consequences of our own choices.
And speaking of consequences, there's a pretty intense description of God's judgment in chapter 30, verses 27 and 28.
Oh, yeah.
It talks about his anger burning like a consuming fire,
Right.
his breath like an overflowing river shaking the nations. That's some intense imagery.
That kind of imagery can feel frightening,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that God's judgment is always rooted in his love and justice.
So it's not just about punishment.
It's not about punishment for its own sake.
What is it about then?
It's about correcting course,
Okay.
about shaking us awake from our complacency and leading us back to the path of righteousness.
Interesting. So it's more about correction than punishment.
Yeah. Think of it like a loving parent disciplining a child.
Right.
It's never out of anger or malice,
Okay.
but out of a desire to see the child grow and mature.
That makes sense. And it connects back to that potter and the clay analogy we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
God is the master craftsman,
He is.
shaping our lives for our ultimate good,
Right.
even if it involves some painful refinement along the way.
That's a great connection.
Like,
Just as a potter uses fire to purify and strengthen the clay, God sometimes uses trials and challenges to purify and strengthen our faith.
right.
Those difficult experiences can actually serve a purpose in our spiritual journey.
It's a tough lesson to learn.
It is.
But ultimately, it's about trusting that God is working for our good,
Yeah.
even when we can't see it.
And this brings us to another important theme in these chapters.
Okay, what's that?
The importance of discernment.
Right.
Isaiah repeatedly warns against listening to false prophets,
Oh, those are bad.
those who offer empty reassurances
Right.
and encourage people to ignore God's truth.
In chapter 30, verse 10, he describes them as saying, "You must not see visions. You must not prophesy the truth to us, speak to us pleasant words, prophesy illusions."
They're essentially saying, tell us what we want to hear,
Right.
not what we need to hear.
It's tempting to gravitate toward those voices.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
It's so tempting to gravitate toward those voices that confirm our biases
Right.
and soothe our anxieties.
Exactly. Instead of facing those uncomfortable truths.
But Isaiah makes it clear that choosing that path leads to disaster.
Okay.
The only way to true peace and security is to align ourselves with God's will,
Even when it's hard.
even when it's challenging or inconvenient.
And that requires us to be discerning,
It does.
to carefully evaluate the messages we're receiving,
Yes.
whether they're from political leaders,
Mhm.
religious figures,
Right.
or even our own inner voices.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to circle back to a detail in these chapters that I think deserves a little more attention.
Okay, what is it?
Remember when we talked about those farming metaphors that Isaiah uses?
Yeah.
There's one particular passage in chapter 28,
Okay.
verses 23 through 29,
Right.
where he gets incredibly specific about agricultural practices.
Yeah. I love this part.
He talks about plowing, sowing different types of seeds, threshing grain.
It's like a sudden time warp back to an ancient Israelite farm.
He's using these everyday activities as a way to teach us about God's character and his way of working in our lives.
So it's not just about planting seeds and harvesting crops.
Exactly.
Okay, what is it about?
He points out that a farmer doesn't plow continuously or thresh grain endlessly.
Right.
There's a rhythm to the work,
Okay.
a time for each stage of the process.
So everything has its season.
And this, he says, reflects God's own wisdom and timing.
I see what you mean. Just as a farmer knows the right time to plant,
Yeah.
cultivate, and harvest,
Right.
so too does God know the right time for everything in our lives.
Right. He's working behind the scenes even when we don't see it or understand it.
Okay.
And just as a farmer carefully chooses the right tools for each task, God uses different methods to shape and refine our lives.
So sometimes it's gentle guidance, like the rain that nourishes the seeds.
Right.
And other times It's more forceful pruning, like the threshing that separates the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that we can trust God's process even when it's uncomfortable or confusing.
Because he knows what he's doing.
He's working for our ultimate good,
Uh,
just as the farmer works for a bountiful harvest.
this brings us back to that theme of trust,
Yes,
which seems to be woven throughout these chapters.
it really is.
Trusting in God's wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
his timing, his purpose for our lives. That's the key to finding true peace and security.
It's a lifelong journey.
A journey of trust.
But these chapters from Isaiah offer us a roadmap.
That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're not just unpacking ancient poetry. We're uncovering timeless truths that are just as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago.
We are.
It's a challenge for all of us, isn't it?
It is.
To surrender our own plans and anxieties, to let go of that illusion of control,
Right.
and to simply trust that God knows what he's doing.
It is indeed a challenge,
It is.
but one worth pursuing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's a good place to pause for a moment.
All right.
We'll return shortly to wrap up our exploration of Isaiah, chapters 28 through 30.
Sounds good.
We're back, and I am still processing all those incredible insights from Isaiah, chapters 28 through 30.
It's amazing how these ancient words can still feel so relevant to our lives today.
Right.
That's the power of Scripture, isn't it?
Yeah.
It speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of time or place.
I'm curious about that striking image in chapter 30, verse 26,
Yeah.
where Isaiah talks about the light of the sun being 7 times brighter on the day the Lord heals his people. It's like this incredible vision of restoration and joy,
It is.
a glimpse of what awaits those who turn back to God.
It's a powerful reminder that God's plan for us is good.
Yeah.
Even when we're going through difficult times,
Mm-hmm.
He's working to bring beauty from ashes,
Okay.
to turn mourning into dancing.
Wow.
He longs to heal and restore us,
Right.
to bring us back into a right relationship with Him.
It's a reminder that even when things seem dark and hopeless, there's always a glimmer of light, a promise of a brighter future for those who trust in God.
And that brings us back to one of the most important lessons from these chapters, the importance of listening.
Right. Not just hearing, but really listening.
It's not just about hearing God's words, but truly internalizing them
Okay.
and letting them shape our actions.
Like we see with Judah's leaders.
We see this clearly with Judah's leaders, right?
Yeah.
They hear Isaiah's warnings,
Uh-huh.
but they choose to ignore them.
They think they know better.
They're so focused on maintaining their own power and security that they miss the bigger picture,
The truth.
the truth that could set them free.
It's like they're physically present, but mentally checked out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their hearts are far from God, even as they go through the motions of religious rituals.
We can all fall into that trap,
And it's a danger we all face, isn't it?
for sure.
We can get so caught up in our own agendas and distractions
Right.
that we fail to truly listen to God's voice.
So it's not just about passive listening.
No.
It's about active engagement with God's message.
Exactly.
It's about letting his words challenge us, convict us, and ultimately transform us.
And that transformation requires humility, a willingness to surrender our own understanding and embrace God's perspective.
Means letting go of our need for control
Right.
and trusting that God knows what's best for us, even when it doesn't make sense to us.
Trust seems like the common thread through all of these chapters.
It does, yeah.
True security and peace come not from our own efforts or clever schemes,
Right.
but from placing our trust in God.
Trusting his wisdom, his timing, his unwavering love for us. That's the foundation for a life of meaning and purpose.
It's a journey that requires constant course correction, right?
Because we're not perfect.
We're all going to stumble and stray at times.
Yeah, but thankfully,
But God's grace is always available to guide us back on track.
always there for us.
Just as the farmer patiently tends to his fields,
Right.
God patiently tends to our hearts, nurturing our growth and guiding us towards a bountiful harvest.
That's encouraging. That's what makes these chapters from Isaiah so powerful.
It is, yeah.
They challenge us, they comfort us,
Right.
and they ultimately point us towards a deeper relationship with a God who loves us more than we can imagine.
Well said. I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Isaiah chapters 28 through 30.
I feel both challenged and encouraged by these powerful verses.
It's been a fascinating exploration,
It has.
and I hope our listeners have found it just as enriching.
I'm sure they have.
We've uncovered some timeless truths that I believe can speak to all of us, no matter where we are on our spiritual journeys.
We've explored the consequences of straying from faith,
Yes.
the importance of seeking true refuge in God,
Uh-huh.
and the transformative power of listening to his voice and trusting in his guidance.
As we go about our week, let's keep these lessons close to our hearts.
Let's try.
Let's strive to listen attentively to God's voice and trust in his guidance, even when the path ahead seems uncertain.
That's good advice.
And let's remember that we're not alone in this journey.
We're not.
We have a God who loves us,
Right.
a God who longs to heal and restore us, a God who is always working for our good.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the book of Isaiah.
Until next time.
May you find peace and strength in the knowledge that God is always with you.